if you're spending $10,000 on 10,000 impressions and you don't get a single conversion from any of those impressions, if you spend $10,000 on the same 100 impressions but you get 10 conversions, like you just, I mean, that's like
and it's not hard math sometimes. Hello, my name is Patrick Miller. I am co-founder of Flywheel, and excited to be joined here today with my colleague Nick to talk through MFA sites and filtering algorithm that Nick and his team have developed.
Hi, I'm Nick Bagley. I'm a data scientist here at Flywheel, working on our AMC team. And my main focus this year has been finding ways that we can optimize the brand activity on DSP to maximize performance. And the main project that I've been looking into is how we can determine the domains and the apps that brands should be serving impressions on, which we've been referring to as site optimization.
Great. So Nick, tell me a little bit about sort of the acronym MFA. What does it stand for? What does it mean? And why is it tricky?
MFAs are made for advertising sites, and it's kind of classified as any site where like each page on the site is overloaded with ads. A user is searching for an article and they're forced to see 10 or 20 impressions on the same page load. You can kind of get varying levels to like how ad heavy these sites are. So it could be something like you're reading a news article and when you scroll down the page and the sides are filled up with 20 ads that most people aren't really looking too heavily into. They can't process all those at the same time.
Sure.
But then it also gets as bad as clicking on a site that really doesn't exist for any purpose other than to advertise. Like there's 100 forced pop-up ads on your screen, and
like every time I search for a recipe and I have to go through like a rabbit hole of like scrolling and just all these awful pop-ups just to figure out like what temperature chicken should be cooked to.
Yeah, exactly. It like feels like your computer is like hacked or something. You're like forced to click through these, and like some of them are unskippable, and nobody's really taking those ads seriously.
Well, I would guess that they don't work either.
The viewability looks good on these ads because people are forced to view them. They're scrolling down the page and they're all there. But what we found is that, we're kind of refer to these MFA sites as junk inventory because they don't actually drive any performance. There's no real return on investment with these impressions.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess there was also there would be actually even a false ROAS through ad consoles because people would see them, technically, and maybe they would do something, but it's probably, correlation, not causation.
The thing is, a lot of these ads are also really heavily forced ad refreshes so that a user can see an ad 100, 1,000 times on a single session just because it keeps refreshing over and over again. And since a user might click on this ad by accident or maybe on purpose, but
it's on accident, I can add a one, but yeah, it's my fat thumbs. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's they might have a lot of detailed page views coming through here because they're linking this ad back to Amazon and then quickly exiting out, not ever really driving an actual purchase from here. But if you kind of only look at surface level of these impressions, you're like, wow, we've served 10,000 impressions on this site last month, and they were all viewable, and we got
some clicks.
Yeah,
and it was inexpensive.
Yeah, and it was cheap. That's the thing. All these are cheap, which really draws people into actually serving impressions on these MFA sites.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm hearing from you is there's a bunch of garbage inventory on the open web. There are sites that are creating this inventory. Brands who are chasing inexpensive reach are fueling the problem because they're now sort of chasing inexpensive CPMs. And then there are a bunch of false positives because technically these things are viewable, even though they refresh all the time. And oh, by the way, they're so intrusive that people accidentally click on them, so that it looks like there's a high CTR as well.
Yep.
All right. So what do you do? How do you determine that these things are actually? How do you actually classify them and then not serve on them?
So very base level here. We looked at a few brands to test with, and we found that over 80% of the sites that were being served impressions on for these brands over the last 3 months, not a single one of that 80% drove a purchase. And these were all sites that, brands were spending on. Some of them sites that just by looking at the names and clicking and doing some like research, they shouldn't really be advertising on those sites. What we do with that is we can kind of quickly see, hey, these sites, you're spending money here and you've never really had a positive return on investment on these sites. So it's as simple as maybe we shouldn't serve them here anymore. And that's just for driving like a purchase or a sale or a detailed page view. If a site has never done any of those, then it shouldn't be inside of the DSP inventory anymore.
So you're looking at it not just at a purchase level, but a conversion event level. So,
Yep, conversion
actually
event.
sort of something that is a signal from the customer that they saw the ad and then they engaged in a sincere way on Amazon. Whether that's an add to cart, a detail page view, a purchase, or whatever, and then saying, hey, if a whole bunch of people saw these ads and then they didn't do anything of value, we should stop serving.
Yeah, exactly. And then with what's remaining, sites that have shown at least some performance, it doesn't always necessarily mean that if there was ever a detail page view on a site, then it's a good site, like we just kind of talked about.
Sure.
So we have like a ranking criteria essentially, where we look at all these different conversion events, detail page views, new to brand purchases, and we weight those into an equation and kind of see how good is this site. Is it just kind of getting by? Like we've maybe had a purchase here, but maybe we shouldn't really focus too much on it. Or is it like this site is really having a positive return on investment? So then with that list, we kind of have a ranked list of sites that this specific campaign should be serving on. And from there, we can set inventory targeting in the DSP.
Okay. And now, so are you doing this in aggregate across everybody, or are you doing this on a brand specific, basis?
We found that the different sites work very differently for different brands. And not just different brands, but actually different funnel stages. So if somebody's running like a low level conversion campaign versus an awareness campaign, different sites can be effective for those. So we're
Yep.
running this at a campaign level.
Great. Okay, so you're saying, hey, if I'm doing brand awareness and for this brand, you're going to use a different filtering algorithm than if you're using a conversion focused campaign, even if it's for the same brand, let alone a totally different brand where they there would be a sort of high variance in efficacy, based off of both the brand but also then the campaign objectives.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Exactly.
Okay, so then what happens? You run the filtering algorithm. What are you seeing? What happens to impressions? What happens to return?
The thing is, we were talking about how cheap these sites are.
Yep.
So something that initially happens with our tests that when we set these new lists for targeting based on these effective sites, CPMs will go up.
Yep.
And for a lot of brands, that can be, an initial shock. I found that looking at other parts of the DSP, targeting low CPMs is, 50% of how budget is determined.
Sure.
We want to go after a goal KPI and we want to go after low CPMs.
Yep.
But we found that, that's not always the best way to approach this. There's a reason that CPMs are low. They're bad sites.
Yeah.
And we often see kind of like an inverse relationship with CPMs and other like cost per metrics, like
Yep.
cost per detail page view, cost per purchase, cost per new to brand. And those are all metrics that we've been focusing on a little more heavily lately with these DSP optimizations.
So you're saying, hey, you run the filtering algorithm, CPMs go up, but cost per action goes down. So now all of a sudden you're using sort of this unique closed loop and deterministic methodology to trade not on cost but on value. And then so you then say, oh yeah, your CPMs went up, but the actual business outcome that you want, that increased more so than the variance in CPMs.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're spending $10,000 on 10,000 impressions and you don't get a single conversion from any of those impressions, if you spend $10,000 on the same 100 impressions, but you get 10 conversions, like you just, I mean, that's like,
And it's not hard math sometimes. Well,
yeah,
I look at it like in a simple way. It's like I always just like I compare the cost of STV to static banners. and static banners, $3, $4, $5, whatever, STB 2025. And so there's a variance in that cost for a reason, like sites out
Hmm.
motion versus a 300 by 250. And so to me, what this is sort of acknowledging the value variance, on a site and a placement level to then allow, brands to trade on that value instead of just that cost. Because ultimately, what's so unique here is that, these brands who had long had to, rely on sort of, probabilism and regression to think through efficacy at a much higher level, we can use determinism to get to a much more granular level to then prove out, how well this is working, or not.
Brands didn't know exactly what to do with these like MFAs in this site optimization case. And it's kind of a difficult thing to figure out, okay, what out of these upwards of 80,000 sites for some brands we looked at, which one of these should we actually be advertising on? And I mean, if you went through each one, you could kind of tell, but it's difficult to figure
Difficult
that
to do
out.
at scale would be my guess without some
Yeah.
some algorithms.
Yeah,
So how are you
exactly.
thinking about refining it? What's next?
What's next for this is right now we have a limitation in this to if a site hasn't been previously advertised on, then it's not going to be targeted in the
Sure.
DSP, which it kind of limits discovery.
Yep.
Maybe there's like a golden site out there that we don't know about yet,
Or the DSP gets new inventory, which
or the
happens
DSP
frequently.
exactly.
Yep.
So then in the future, what we want to do is once we have that list of sites that we know works, we want to kind of start to cycle out. Maybe we take the bottom few performing sites in that list that works, and we cycle those out every month and introduce kind of discovery of new inventory.
Yep.
Then reevaluate this site optimization every month and see, oh, wow, okay, these new sites are actually working really well. Let's keep them in. Or, oh, they actually, turns out these new sites that we're trying to find out are also junk.
You're holding the publishers constantly accountable, and I think
Mhm.
that's a great approach because it's sort of like personally, like I hate the name MFA because the New York Times is made for advertising, like they sell advertising, the Wall Street Journal sells advertising, it's also performant and works and it's worth buying. And so to me it's like any site that is selling advertising is made for advertising, and holding the publishers constantly accountable for driving performance for our brands, the algorithm will give them a chance in the future to then say, all right, you've improved your performance, we're going to start buying on there. So I think that's a phenomenal approach.
We're not afraid to like take that out of rotation for inventory targeting. And if something that, previously was bad now becomes good for other brands, we want to realize that and then borrow that from like some sort of master list of wow, these are the sites that perform good for all Flywheel brands, and kind of cycle that in and discover that again.
Great. And so our colleagues, they can just, run, how difficult is it to run, and, how frequently is it, are you updating it?
Previously with these tests, we've been running it pretty manually, but what's coming out pretty soon for us is it'll be very easy for people to run this in the DSP. It'll be a simple opt-in of do you want to enable this site optimization in the UI? They'll click on yes, and the site algorithm in the backend will just look at all of their previous targeting history, all of the site performance, and generate that kind of list of, hey, these are the sites you should be advertising on, and automatically apply that for them. And then this will get rerun every month to reevaluate that performance of, hey, this list that we looked at actually isn't performing too well, or oh my god, like look at this crazy spike or drop in these metrics, so that we can quickly adjust that and either introduce new sites or keep going with what we have because it's working.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick. Like, really, excited to see the performance and or continue to performance. I presented, on some of these results, a couple of months ago, and the the brands I was talking to were thrilled, and looking forward to talking with Amazon, about it more, and then expanding this to other platforms, because I think the sort of same sort of algorithm, would work across, the trade desk as well as other DSPs. So thank you so much, and excited to see what you build next.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
Awesome.